This is Drinking with Farley. I'm at Revolution Brewing right now. We'll see how this comes out. I don't know. It's my new lens. I just walked over here. It ain't far from my place, so we're gonna see. I don't know if they got a tour or what. We're gonna find out right now. Is it open? No, wrong door. Wrong door. Let's do this. This will be my first like actual brewery vlog, so we'll see how it goes. It's just real basic looking. Real basic looking building. And you see right here, tap room. I smell popcorn.
So that is a beer that we've been doing literally since day one, since the start. So we've been doing that pretty regularly. It's won a few gold medals over the years, and we now started put that into cans for the first time maybe about 2 years ago. So that's available regularly out in 18 packs. So if you like that, you can find that probably out in some store shelves and whatnot. So that beer, officially it's called a British Summer Ale. That's the official style name. A lot of people just call it a golden ale. People usually know what that means. It's going to be light, crisp, kind of a clean finish to it. So that's what kind of beer that is. Now, when we are walking around, we'll be talking about how beer is made in general. You can relate a lot of that back to the beer that you're actually drinking there. We'll talk about color, clarity of your beer. We'll talk about aroma. Aroma is a big part of tasting anyways. We'll talk about what kind of ingredients contribute to that aspect of your beverage. And then also, we'll talk about mouthfeel and body, so all those different qualities there. So think about those things while you're drinking that beer. We'll be talking about those aspects there. Before we actually get started, I got to go over a few quick ground rules. I used to tell people to just use common sense. Turns out that was really poor common sense on my part. So now I got to go over all sorts of things that I thought were obvious, but some people try to do anyway. So you shouldn't lick anything on the tour. So surprise, surprise. Yeah. So head on back. So I'll give you guys a little bit of history. Revolution Brewing, we are just over 8 years old. So we started out in February of 2010. And for the first 2 years, all we had was that brew pub that we opened up. So we were founded by Mr. Josh Deep. Josh is still the principal owner. We're still independently owned. So for those first 2 years, all our beer was being made over there, all our beer was being consumed over there at that brew pub. We weren't doing any distribution. Then in 2012, we opened up this facility, and since then, the majority of all our beers are made right here. Everything that we're making here is going out of distribution. All of our canning is done here. All our large batch kegging is done here. All the distribution originates right here. We do still make beer over in the brew pub. Those are small batch beers.
Talking about beer, I'm in heaven.
And he makes all. You drink it next week, your beer's still fine. It hasn't gone bad. There's a time component to that whole temperature thing as well. So, but all of our beer goes in here and stays cold in here. So all these kegs you see out here, these are empty. None of those are actually filled with beer. In addition to that beer in the cooler, we also have our first main ingredient. So when we're talking about making beer, we're essentially working with 4 main ingredients. There's always variables beyond that, but you've got your water, number 1. You've got your malts, your grains. You've got yeast, and you've got hops. Those are your 4 right there. So hops, what are hops? This hop cone right here, this is essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about hops. So this is a plastic hop cone, not real. But they look like this, they grow on vines. That's what you harvest off of there, and then that's what you use as an ingredient in your beer. When we use hops, they don't quite look like this, but this is the imagery that you see around out there. So we have those different characters. You see the Galaxy Hero, the Anti-Hero. Those characters, their head is a hop cone. Sometimes people ask me, what's up with all the artichoke superheroes? Those are hop cones that we're using for that imagery there. So when we use hops, though, they don't look like that. They use pelletized hops. And essentially it looks like rabbit food, like alfalfa pellets. So these are just pelletized hops. Essentially the same thing, they're just compressed. And there's a few reasons why we use these and not the fresh hops. If you're just going to use fresh hops, they're only harvested at a certain time of year. They're going to last so long on the shelf, and they take up a ridiculous amount of space compared to the pelletized things. So these condensed hops are just much more conducive to large batch brewing throughout the year. So that's how we use them. We do make a few what are called wet hop beers or freshly hopped beers. We did 2 last year. Both of them were IPAs, and those hops were locally sourced. One we do each year in conjunction with the Shed Aquarium. They have some beer enthusiasts and beer nerds, if you will, down there that grow hops at the actual Shed Aquarium outside. If you walk around outside, you can actually see the hops growing out there. They harvest those and they bring them into our pub brewer Will each year and make a beer with it. It's a pale ale. It's called Penguin Hops. So they name that, and then a portion of the proceeds go right back to the Shed Aquarium. Last year we also did one with Hophead Farms right outside of Kalamazoo in Michigan, and some of our brewing staff went to the actual farm, picked out the hops that they liked, and then that harvest came in right away, and they made a wet hop beer, freshly hopped beer with those hops from Hophead Farms. So we do a couple of those each year. Now, sometimes people want to know, what do hops actually do to your beer? Why is this an ingredient? A lot of people associate hops exclusively with bitterness. You'll hear people say all the time, I'm looking for a beer that's not too hoppy, or I'm looking for a hoppier beer. Usually they're thinking bitterness there, but hops do a lot more than that. They also add other flavors, maybe citrusy tones, things like that. And they add to the nose of your beer. A lot of that aroma that you get off your beer is almost exclusively coming from hops, especially when we do what's called dry hopping, which is just adding hops towards the end of the beer making process. That really kicks up the aromatics, and you get those big, strong aromas. A lot of our IPAs, if you go and have those out there, you'll get big noses of citrus, grapefruit specifically, things like that. If you have our Rev Pilsner, it's very perfumey, very floral aroma there. So it all depends on what kind of hops you're using. There's dozens of different varietals out there, almost like grapes to wine. Each kind brings a different host of qualities to that beverage you're making. So a lot of these different barrels that you see here, most of these are bourbon barrels. Occasionally we do use things like whiskey barrels. We've experimented with rum barrels, gin barrels, cognac barrels, Cabernet wine barrels, so really all sorts of different kinds of stuff. But mostly what you're going to see right here are bourbon barrels. And you'll see some of the different distilleries where they actually originate. So you'll see a lot of Heaven Hill here. We use Woodford Reserve. You'll see some Buffalo Trace around here, Four Roses, places like that. So when they come into us, they still have some residual product to them. That's part of what we're after. We'll get them in, we fill them. We tend to use heavier, darker, stronger beers. We'll put them then up in the racks out in that tap room, and we'll age those up in those racks on average about 9 months. Occasionally we've gone as long as 2.5 years to age some beers. During that aging process, that beer is picking up lots of bourbon flavor, lots of bourbon aroma, and you're even picking up alcohol. If you started out with a strong beer, maybe 10% ABV, what you get out of that barrel 9 months later is probably 12%. So it really does spike it up there pretty well. If you're curious about trying some of that stuff, we do have one that's on tap right now. It's called the Straight Jacket. And that Straight Jacket is a barley wine that's been aged in bourbon barrels. It's just over 13%, so it is strong stuff. If you don't like bourbon, you're probably not going to like those beers. The barley wine is kind of the sweeter one, and that bourbon aging has some nice warmth to it. It's a really tasty beer. Just be warned that it is intense stuff, so that's what's going to be the case. Also, our flagship of sorts of all the bourbon aged beers, we do one that's called Death Star. A lot of people want to say Death Star. We don't technically call it Death Star. We don't want Disney coming after us. It is called Death Star, named after our owner Josh Death. That's where the name comes from, Death Star. So that's an imperial oatmeal stout aged in bourbon barrels. That's a really popular one in wintertime, and we canned that this past winter as well. So we just started doing our bourbon aged beers in cans this past winter. So that's kind of a new thing that we've been doing with those bourbon aged beers. Why is grain even used? Number one reason, sugar source. This is where we're getting our sugars from. So we get starches and enzymes that convert those into sugars, and that's what the yeast will use for fermentation. That's how we end up with alcohol and carbonation. It all starts with the sugar from the grain. In addition to that, grain will help determine color of your beer. A lot of the color is coming strictly from the actual grain, the malts that you're using. Also flavors, when you have maltier beers, stouts, porters, things like that, you get roastiness, chocolate tones, smokiness, biscuity notes, bread, things like that. Those flavors are coming exclusively from the grain, not hops or anything else. And then also the mouthfeel, the body of your beer. Is your beer really light and thin? Is it heavy and syrupy, viscous? A lot of that is determined by proteins left behind, sugars that don't ferment out. All that stuff builds up the density of your liquid, and you get a heavier bodied beer. So, right here. So this is our 120 barrel brew house right here. We've been using this for about 2 years. Before we had this system, we had a 45 barrel system, but you can see right through the opening over there. And back over at our brew pub, we have our original 15 barrel system. So this thing is a monster compared to what we started out with. So this 120 barrel brew house, when the brewers are working up here, what they are making up here is not yet technically a full-blown beer. What they are making in the brew house is called wort, W-O-R-T, wort. So what is wort? Essentially it's your beer base is what we're going to ferment into beer. For the sake of a very simple analogy, and again, don't poke too many holes in this, but if you're going to make bread, you have to make a dough first. So that's kind of what we're going to do here. So we're going to make a batch of wort up here. It takes about 8 hours to produce a batch of wort. You're going to use 3 out of 4 main ingredients. We're going to use water, grain, and hops. And we're not yet using yeast. We're not fermenting. A finished batch of wort still doesn't have any alcohol or any carbonation to it. All that comes later. So only about 8 hours to produce a batch of wort. Fermentation will take upwards of 2 weeks to complete all the different processes. So there's 4 tanks in the series right here. The first tank in the back is what's called the mash tun. In there, on average per batch, we'll put about 8,000 pounds of grain, hot water, let that stew away, and essentially you make a hot sugary oatmeal. You get all that sugar from the grain into solution, into that wort solution we're making. From there, it's time to get rid of the grain. It's already given us its contribution. Time to get that out. You want to be able to drink beer, not chew on it, so we got to get all that grain out of it. So in here, this is called the lauter tun up front here. It's got a screen bottom, a false bottom in there. It allows that sugary wort solution to pass right through while straining out all that spent grain. Now we don't just throw that stuff away. The spent grain we take, we pump it out via this large pipe. That pipe will continue all the way out through past the tap out to the garage from empty. We dump that grain in the container trucks out there, hold that, and then local farmers come up from Indiana each morning, pick up that grain, take it back and use it as feed for animals, so it all gets reused and recycled that way. If you like completing Elton John's Circle of Life, you can go over to our brew pub and have a delicious dinner. Sometimes those same animals wander back into our kitchen, and we make delicious pulled pork. You can have some of that. It may have been fed spent grain, so kind of a neat thing there. It's kind of a hyper-local thing, so it works out pretty well. Next up over here, we got the boiler or the kettle. In there, we're going to raise the temperature of this wort up to a boiling temperature, make sure everything is now sterilized, make sure there's no bacterial issues. We're also going to add hops in there. We start getting our bitterness and our other flavors. Aromatics will come later with dry hopping towards the end of the whole process. And then one last tank back in the corner, the whirlpool. Just like we got rid of the grain earlier, now we're going to get rid of hops and proteins, things like that. So we load that wort into that whirlpool tank, spin that around, create a whirlpool effect. All those grains kind of start clumping together in the, excuse me, not grains. All those hops start clumping together in the middle, and you can drain off that finished wort off the side. You leave behind what's called trube, which is that stuff we don't want in that wort solution. Leave that behind, drain off the finished wort off the side. It's now been about 8 hours. We got a finished batch of wort. We're going to send it down to fermentation on the cellar side, add the yeast, and turn that into a full-blown beer. So we'll go down there and check that out. So this is our original and still main cellar area. This is where we do a lot of the fermentation. Almost all the tanks that you see here with a cone bottom, it's going to be a fermenter. So we're going to turn that wort into a full-blown beer. These are 60 barrel tanks right here, 120, and then down at the end, the largest ones we have inside are 240 barrel tanks. So once we fill one of these guys up with wort, the larger tanks take several batches. But once it's filled up, we can then add the yeast, we pitch the yeast in there. The yeast starts using up the available fermentable sugars and turning that into ethanol, which is our alcohol, and CO2, which is our carbonation. This is turning into a full-blown beer then at this point. That process goes on, the actual fermentation process will go on for probably 6-7 days. The sugars are being used up, and that CO2 gas is building up in there. If we don't vent that out, this will build up enough pressure to eventually rupture. We don't want that, obviously. So you'll see behind me some of these runoff buckets, these little blue buckets here. We run a vent hose down into that. We run it underwater, so it's a one-way street. The gas can bubble out and escape, but you don't have air and oxygen going back up inside. So right now, if you come over and take a peek if you like. This is pretty mild, but that's just straight CO2 gas that's bubbling out of there. Sometimes, if that tank is super full, you'll actually get a little bit more than that. You'll get some beer elements, some suds and things, and that stuff will actually almost be volcanic at times, sloshing around and coming out of that bucket. So this is pretty mild right here, but that's the CO2 gas that we're just venting out of those tanks right there. So like I said, after all the sugars are eventually used up, or most of the sugars I should say, that yeast settles out. It drops down to the bottom of this cone. So that cone is there just to funnel everything down to a point. You build up some of that yeasty sludge at the bottom that you want to get rid of. You don't want to chew on that while you're drinking beer, obviously, so we get that out of there. Drain that right off the bottom, and your beer is almost finished. At this point, your beer is still very cloudy, still very foggy. You want to get some nice clarity to it, so we run it through a centrifuge. The centrifuge just isolates, pulls out that last remaining bit of yeast, and then you get the nice clarified beer coming out the other side. So right back behind me here, the centrifuge is what kind of looks like a UFO flying saucer. It's running right now. That's what kind of sounds like a vacuum cleaner. And we can do on average about 100 barrels of beer per hour through there. It always varies depending on the kind and the level of clarity that we're going for. So that is the centrifuge right there that just kind of clicked off it. All of these tracks out here, all the different tracks that you see, that is just for routing different finished cans. So some of those are going to go into 12-pack boxes or 18-pack boxes. Some of those just get the plastic grouping toppers that put them into 6-packs. So all those different tracks just route those cans into different packages. Come all the way back here, guys. You can come down here and check out the cans. Just please remember, do not touch the cans, do not grab them. Do not try to hug the cans. But you can take all the photos you want. What's that? They're all good. No matter. Obviously empty. None of these are filled. If they were full, they'd be in cold storage right now. This is how they come into us. They come in by the pallet. They come in by the truck full. A single pallet like this, a 12-ounce cans, a little over 8,000 on there for a single pallet. These are produced just south of here in Kankakee. The company is called Crown Cork and Seal. So they've produced these for us. They come in all printed up, ready to go. However, I'll show you there is one significant difference. When you look at the top of the can, it is wide open. There's no top on that can. That is a separate piece that is added later on. This way we can insert them into the machine, blow them out, make sure that they're clean, and then we add the beer, we fill these, and only then do we finally add that top on and seal that up. So right now, completely open on top there. Sometimes people ask why cans in the first place, why not bottles? We used to use some glass bomber bottles. We don't anymore. Everything is exclusively canned now. So some things have changed in recent years. 10 years ago, you didn't really see a whole lot of craft breweries using cans. It was pretty rare. There was still a kind of a stigma against the can. Some people thought, oh, you know, if it's good beer, it's got to go in a glass bottle. Only cheap swill that my grandpa drinks goes in a can or something like that. Not true. Definitely not the case anymore. Lots of craft breweries are using cans nowadays. They're pretty widely accepted. So there are some specific advantages. They're cheaper. They're all recycled and recyclable. They have a lining to the inside of the can nowadays, so you shouldn't get any kind of a tinny taste that people used to complain about. But also, they're opaque. They're impervious to light. That's a very big deal for your beer. Two main enemies to your finished beer are oxygen and light. Those two will alter your beer and give you off flavors. So using an opaque vessel like that, the can, you already have a safeguard against one of your main enemies. That's an excellent thing right there. As the cans go on down the track, they get a rinse on the outside to make sure we're not sending out sticky cans. And then also they go through an X-ray machine. The X-ray machine just checks each can to make sure it's adequately filled. If a can is even remotely underfilled, it's automatically rejected. There's a mechanical arm that just knocks it right off the belt, and that never goes out for distribution that way. On average, the error is around 1 out of every 200 cans, only 0.5%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you do 100,000 cans in a day, it turns into a decent pile of beer that we can't sell. So we have to find good homes for that stuff somehow. We can't sell it, of course, but there's more than one way to have a good week, and you can always take home some of that low-filled beer with you, so it works out. All right, guys. Well, in 2012, the first year that we did distribution, we produced a total of about 8,000 barrels of beer. That was our first year in this facility. 8,000 barrels was our total production that year. We've grown immensely since then. In 2015, we did about 65,000 barrels, and last year was a little over 85,000. We are already the largest craft brewery in the state of Illinois. We've been there for several years. And in terms of the entire US, the entire country, we are number 46. We're the 46th largest craft brewery in the United States. Again, I specifically say craft brewery. So in order to be designated craft brewery, there's a couple factors that go into it. A few different factors. The main two are one, size. You can't be too small, can't be too big. And number two, ownership. You have to maintain independent ownership. Sometimes people ask, what about Goose Island, what about Lagunitas? Aren't they larger than you? They certainly are, but they don't technically qualify as craft breweries because of that outside ownership factor. So that's not to say that they don't make great beer, they make great beer, but they do not qualify as craft breweries, so they're looked at a little bit differently there when it comes to some of these numbers. So, largest craft brewery in Illinois. To compare the largest two craft breweries in the US, number one is Yuengling out of Pennsylvania. Number two is Boston Brewing or Sam Adams. Both those guys in 2016 produced a little over 2 million barrels per year. So we are number 46, and in 2016, I think it was around 75,000 was our number. So, in terms of distribution, you can find us in about 8 states. We are in, obviously, Illinois, well saturated throughout the Chicagoland area. We are in Wisconsin, Indiana, and we are also in Ohio. We've been out there for several years. We're in Boston, New York City, and expanding through Jersey and parts of Philadelphia. I don't know if I mentioned Michigan. We've been in Michigan for about 6 to 9 months as well. So we're out there too. So that's kind of our area. We're in those areas. That wraps me up here, guys. Thanks for not licking stuff. Appreciate that. It's good.
Under here. What's up, everybody? That was a little brewery tour from Revolution Brewing. This is my first brewery vlog. This is Under Hero. This was actually made here, so it's kind of awesome. Let me know if you guys like this kind of stuff. I'll do more. I'll find some more breweries. We'll go check them out. I'll do some vlogs from there. I think you might enjoy it. I enjoyed the fuck out of it. I got a free can of beer out of it, so nothing wrong with it. So, you guys, stay thirsty. Cheers.